Hello and welcome, Brett here with ClickMill.co. In this video, I want to talk to you about the mental model or law of compounding. And compounding is one of the most powerful rules that you can play to your advantage. Now, this is just a facet, again, of reality, of how God created the world. And the longer you're around and you can just show up, the more growth you're going to see simply as a matter of the fact that you showed up. Okay, so what do I mean? And again, it's easiest to understand this in sort of an economic or financial investing sort of scenario. So let's say I put, $100 in an investment, and that gets, let's just say I got a super good investment. I get 10% per year. Well, what happens on $100? Well, year two, I have 110. Okay, so I got 10% of my 100. So I had 100 next year, I got 10% tacked on. Well, if it compounds, the next year I don't have 120. I get 10, $10 on the 100, that's 10%, and then I get $1 on the 10. So I actually make more and more and more every year. It is exponential in its increase. Now, this takes a long time to compound, and it is a very slow burn, but it's the patient that win out in the game of compounding. So year one, you make $10. Year two, you make $11. Year three, you make 11.10. Year four. And so every year you make a little more, a little more, a little more. And what happens is you get that exponential growth curve where for a long time, for 40 years or 35 years, it doesn't really look like a lot's happening. And that growth curve picks up, and then whoop, it goes right off the top. And all of a sudden you've got like millions of dollars sitting in this account. That is how you're supposed to invest. A lot of people are always chasing the biggest return. That's not really how you want to play that game. You want to wait. You want to be around the longest so you can take advantage of the compounding. A great example of this is Berkshire Hathaway with Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett. They only had something like $500 million in investments until they were over 60, and now they're all like, I think Charlie Munger just passed. These two gentlemen are the best investors in the stock market that the world has ever seen, and they had 500 million when they were 60, and by the time they're 80, they've got something like 8 billion in investments. Why? It's nothing that they did. It was just the patience that they had. Their favorite investment strategy is do nothing. Their default, everybody else is over here like, oh, hey, we should buy this, we should sell this. Oh, look, things are going up, they're coming down, we should reposition, we should move. And their baseline is, we're just going to sit here peacefully and we're going to do nothing. That's the baseline. If they're going to do something, they really have to justify it. Everybody else's baseline is doing something. What they understand is that the world rewards compounding. And the more they move things, the more it interrupts the compounding. And so what happens? They're investing and doing as little as possible for something like 30 years. And then, they make 500 million. And then in the last 20 years, it goes from 500 million to 8 billion. Well, that is just that's a huge exponential return. Why? They're still not doing anything. They're still doing as little as possible. And that compounding has finally kicked in. And that's when you make all the returns. So when we talk about the rule of compounding, this is so important in ministry. If you want growth, all you have to do is just stick around. That's the main thing. A lot of ministries are trying to get growth and they're doing all of these extravagant and extraordinary things to get growth. Well, here's the problem. When you fund a giant rock band and you fund these giant events and you do this and you do that, and you're spending all of the resources to try to generate growth, you have no resources. And this is the case with a lot of ministries. A lot of ministries have a lot of debt because they're chasing growth and they're leveraging debt. And what happens when economic times get hard and they don't have any cash in the bank? Those ministries go belly up. They disappear. They go out of business. Say what you want about ministries not being businesses. It's called going out of business when your nonprofit is out of money and you can't pay your bills. So they go out of business, and they were doing all this super cool stuff. They had 1,000 people, they had 2,000 people, and now they're gone. Where do those people go? To whoever's still there. So there is, when we talk about strategy, we talk about you have to have the right mindset. You have to have the strategy in place. Then what do? You sustain long enough until you can figure out what grows. This can actually be simplified when you're talking about long periods of time and compounding, because all you have to do is wait for other people to mess up their systems, and they will. And then this is the Matthew principle: to whoever has, take away from the one who doesn't have and give it to the one who has. This is a very real principle that plays out in real life. And when other people make poor decisions and unwise decisions in their ministries and in their businesses, all of their parishioners and customers and like whatever it is that whoever's participating with them, they have to go somewhere. And if you're there to catch it, you'll get it. This is why when we look at the world, power centralizes at the top, wealth centralizes at the top, because the vast majority of people do not have the ability or do not have the understanding of how to hold on to what has been given to them, so that when things become unstable and the waves start coming in the world, they either panic and drop it, or they didn't have enough buffer, right? A margin of safety. They didn't have enough money in the bank to get them through that hard time. So what happens? They fall out, and then someone else picks it up. This is a huge strategy that Amazon uses all the time. Amazon will store up a huge just glut of cash, and then they'll drop all the prices on the whole platform below what anybody can compete with. And what happens? Well, you're going to get a sale. So I'm going to go to Amazon. Well, what happens to all the smaller businesses that can't compete with those prices? They go out of business. What happens when they go out of business? You have to go to Amazon, because now they're the only people that sell that thing. And then what happens? They put their prices back to normal and they have all the business. So this is an example of exactly what we're talking about. So what we want to do with compounding is we just want to be the person who can stick around long enough to take advantage of the rewards that God's creation has in this life and the next, to gain just because we didn't lose. So when we look at that strategy sort of diagram, you don't even have to grow. Growth can come naturally simply because you have not failed. So it can actually be more simple to that. Now, of course, we can also obviously add growth strategies to grow more quickly, but on a minimum, just not losing actually will get you growth. And sometimes it will make you the biggest because the compounding kicks in. Now, how do we see this in the Bible? I think this is super biblical. How do we run the race? Do we run the race like a sprinter? No, we run the race like a marathon runner who is going to run and never ever stop. Why? Because it is to the victor who gets the crown. All you have to do in your Christian faith is just stay in it until you meet Jesus or the Lord returns, and you win. You don't have to be a super duper amazing, do something crazy. You just have to show up and be there at the end. That's the goal. You just have to cross the finish line. You just have to keep going. So if you've got to run a little slower to make sure you get to the finish line, run a little slower. And that is the law of compounding. So long as you reach the finish line, you get a huge reward. And so we have to figure out, you can see how a lot of these are connected. This is the same thing as consider the cost. What is the cost to get that rock to the top of the hill? What is the cost that it's going to take to get to that point where the compounding kicks in and you start to see the growth and the blessing? You have to be willing to pay that cost. You have to be willing to endure that sacrifice to get there. And this is where we talk about the good soil. The seed in the good soil has the deep roots that can sustain the plant when there's famine and when there's these hard times. And the shallow roots, that plant just tips over. It just dries out. It can't handle the hardship. The plant with the deep roots can last long enough to reach this point at which the compounding will kick in our Christian life. That's the point at which we meet Jesus and we get to go to heaven. In the point of ministry or business, it is when things start to grow naturally without us having to just put immense amounts of energy in. And then that plant starts growing so quickly, it becomes more about pruning and controlling the growth as opposed to trying to get it to grow. And so with compounding, The goal here is just to stay in the game as long as you possibly can and set things up firstly so that you're sustainable. Growth can only come after you last long enough to sustain. And sometimes you won't even need to grow. The compounding will just kick in because you're the only one left, or you've been around long enough and you'll just start to see the exponential growth simply as a matter of the fact that you're still here. So with that, let's continue to run the race, as though we want to finish it in whatever it is that God has called us to, and especially in our Christian walk. And if you have questions, if you have thoughts, I'd love to see them in the comments, and I will see you in the next video. God bless.